Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me? So as you can see, we're all sweating. Is there anybody that isn't sweating? If you're not sweating, please let me understand the cream you are using so I can follow through with it. Okay, if you have questions for me, I want you to visit sly.do and then use the event code PWS. If we have enough time, I'll take some questions on stage. But if not, I'll probably try to reply through the app when I have got the chance. Now, today, as the topic entails, it says production war stories, right? So there's something I usually like to start with, is I like to get a feel of the room. How many of us are core engineers here? If you're an engineer, raise your hand. Don't be shy, don't be shy. We know ourselves. Huh? If you're a product person, raise your hands, let me see. Product people, thank you for your service to humanity. You people work very, very tediously with engineers who can frustrate your lives, Abi. Yes? If you are a DevOps engineer, let me see. Or aspiring DevOps engineer, I think I'll use the word aspiring. Yeah? All right. Seems like all of us were a bit stiff. I think it's because there's no, the heat and everything. Can we all stand up? Just stand. Ah, yes, I know. Stand. Stand. Should we do it like church service? Look for two people and say hello. Just two people. Say welcome to GDG Lagos. Not the person beside you, somebody else. Somebody else. Walk across. All right. Okay, thank you. I know that was stressful. All right, so I will talk about a bunch of stories that happened, and I'll try to keep it short in the interest of time, but then I'll also then point out some tips that helped me through those situations. Now, when I first started development, and trust me, I've been developing for about 18 years or so. I and Femi started out around the same time, and the earliest thing I remember about development was deployments were difficult. Now, how many of us know DigitalOcean? Yeah, a good chunk of us, right? They are $5 servers, very cheap. So I thought, for most of all my applications, why not put it on DigitalOcean, right? Which was what I did. And I had a lot of customers that were growing at the time, and all the apps were running in DigitalOcean. Every single time I had a new customer, what do? I launch a new VM. And then before you know what's happening, I was spending close to $1,200 or $1,200 per month on servers. Now, guess the interesting thing. I was only using about 5% of the total capacity. So I was wasting close to $1,000 every month. $1,000. That's $360K. I don't know how many plates of pepper soup that is, but for those of you that drink pepper soup, you can do the math, right? So I figured to myself, how can I put this money back in my pocket? Pause. I'm a mentor in the Google Launchpad program, and I was mentoring a startup from South Africa, and we were talking. This was in San Francisco during the Launchpad Global, as my colleague mentioned earlier, GB from Flutterwave. And interestingly enough, I asked them, how much do you guys spend on server and stuff, all your infrastructure and everything? And it was funny what he answered. How many? Can anybody guess? Just shout out a number. How much? Somebody said $800. So, $9. Anybody else? What? $35, zero. They were spending $120,000 every month. Yes. And I was as shocked as you. So I asked them, what are you building? Are you trying to save the world? Are you running the world's workloads? What is going on? And turns out they were doing the same thing I was doing. Every time they had a new service or a new application they needed to run, what did they do? They launched a new AWS EC2 instance. That simple. And they were running MX large, so it was really expensive. So how did I solve that problem? I used containers. I'm sure a lot of us have heard about Kubernetes. We've all heard about Docker. This session is not about intro to Kubernetes or intro to Docker, so don't worry. It's just a talk, right? I'm sure there's other tracks. I'm sure Emmanuel or somebody else is giving a talk about Kubernetes, Intro 101. Please attend those sessions. It will give you insights on how you can use it. It's an open source API, so you don't have to pay for it. But if you ask my own advice, based on the experiences I've had in production, it is better for you to pay for a managed service. Now, luckily, you don't even have to pay. Google has GKE. It's called Google Container Engine. It is free. Of course, you pay for your nodes, but using their managed server or their managed cloud plane is actually free. They give it to you for free, and they manage it themselves. So you can do what's important. You can focus on building software. You don't have to focus on managing the hardware. Like, I remember when I was using DigitalOcean, anytime there were issues, I had to SSH into the server, get the IP address, do all that kind of stuff. But with using containers and Kubernetes paired with Docker, you wouldn't have to do all of that, and you can focus on what's important. Do not use Kubernetes for data stores. What's a data store? Like databases, like MySQL, MongoDB. I'll tell you something that happened. So I consult for a company called Gigster.com. And right now, we are about 600 to 800 engineers. So it turns out that one day, I don't know who this individual is, went and bricked one of our Vault servers because we were using Kubernetes to manage Vault. Vault is something we use to manage secrets in production. And you know what happened? All of the 600 engineers were not able to do anything just because we were using it to manage a data store. Now, there are some people who have done it successfully, but if you're just starting out, or if you are a medium to large scale team, or even if you're a small startup, my own tip is if you're going to use containers, do not use it for anything that has to do with storing data. So don't use it for databases, don't use it for things that, you can use it for Redis, I guess, because that's a temporary cache. So after we migrated to Kubernetes, we were able to cut costs. Now, remember what I said? I was spending $1,200, right? After I finished my migration, I was spending $300. $300. That is about, is it 60 or 70% cost reduction, I think. My math is off. But guess, the startup that was spending $120,000, guess how much they were able to save? Can anybody guess? 1,000? That's ambitious. Anybody else? 2,000. They reduced their cost to $3,000 from $120,000. So if you find yourself in this situation, whether you're working for an enterprise company, or whether you're running your own startup, and you see that you're spending a lot of money on workloads, this can help you save money. Now, when you move into deployments, when it's time to get your applications into production, these are some of the issues that people face. They don't have multiple environments. They usually have one environment. I have been in that situation before. The same server is what we'll use for testing. It's the same server that we'll use for production. When we want to test code, we test live code. Can you imagine? This was me back in the day. And let me tell you the issue that we usually had. We always found out that anytime developers wanted to deploy code, whether it's good code or whether it's bad code, because we only had one environment, which was the production environment, there was no buffer. There was nothing in between. It just went straight to production, so which means your customer would experience those issues. Now, the next question people always ask me is, do we use one cluster per environment, or do we use namespaces per environment? An environment is, like I mentioned, the different stages. Now, this is my own tip. Use development servers, have a staging server, and have a production server. When you isolate these environments, anytime your developers do some work, it goes to the development environment. Once they're finished and it's been merged, and everything is okay, you can move it to staging. Staging is supposed to be an exact replica or a close enough replica of your production environments, right? That's where you do your load testing. That's where you test. And then production is your actual final, where your users hit. This is a useful tip, at least 3 environments. So if you're going to have 3 environments, are you using namespaces or are you using clusters? If you have the money to burn, right, and, like Sarkodie says, say money no be problem. If money is not a problem, you can have 3 clusters, and each cluster will represent those 3 different environments which I talked about. But if you are a small startup and you're sure you are going to be able to manage your deployments, which is use things like resource limits, make sure that the CPU does not, CPU usage of one pod does not affect, or one app does not affect the other app, or memory usage of one app does not affect the other app, then you can go and use namespaces. There's no issue there. You can use namespaces. But just remember, if you're going to use namespaces, make sure that your deployments are configured tightly. Take advantage of what we call resource requests and limits, and use what we call liveliness and readiness probes. I'll tell you a story. So there was a time when I configured my deployment in Kubernetes, and we didn't use resource requests or limits. Let me tell you what happened. Someone deployed a Java application that had a memory leak. How many of us know what memory leaks are? Yeah, most of us. So a memory leak is essentially something that will force your app to keep losing memory or leaking memory. So if your app is supposed to use 256 MB of RAM, if it's leaking memory, you know what? After an hour, it will be using 512. After an hour, it will be using 1 gig. After 2 hours, it will use 10 gig, and so on and so forth. And if you keep using up those memory on the VM or on the node until everything will go down. This happened to me in production, live running app. At 2 a.m. in the morning, they called me, "Oga, our server is not working. You know how clients can be." And guess what was the problem? This. So how did I solve it? I just set the limit. I said, oh, this application cannot use more than 256 MB of RAM. This application cannot use more than 100 millicycles or compute cycles of CPU power. And I configured that for every single pod. Look, if you don't configure these things and you're moving to things like Kubernetes using containers, you will find out that some of the mistakes that I made earlier on when I was playing around with technology and moving into using all of these tools will then happen to you. And you'll be trying to figure out, why does it keep going down? These are the tools, and these are the tips. Now, CI/CD and automation. How many of us know what this topic is? I think there should be nobody in this room that doesn't. Okay, is there anybody in this room that doesn't know what this topic is? Really? Okay. All right, there's a bunch of you. All right, so what's CI/CD? CI/CD is essentially continuous integration and continuous delivery. It is the process by which you take your code, which has been developed on your laptop, and integrate it with the repository wherever it is that it's kept, or wherever the code base is kept. And continuous delivery is the process by which you get that code from wherever the repository is into wherever your environment is. This environment could be staging, could be could be development, or could be production, right? Remember the stages I talked about earlier? That's what I'm referring to. Now, CI/CD is a form of automation. Back in the day, we had developers who had access to all the environments directly. So if a developer has done something and he feels, my code is tight, it's time to go to production, with no filter, with no permission from anybody, with no checking from anybody, you just do SSH, FTP, copy, and boom, the code is already on the server. And then 5 minutes later, the Oga is one calling. Our server is down. And then you, who is the person's boss, is the person who has to go and figure out what just went wrong. And you know why? That's because he had direct access. There was no controlled checking. There was no controlled steps. He did it himself manually. In fact, I've even had a situation where even with multiple environments, a developer wanted to push his code to the development environment and accidentally pushed it to the production environment. Has any of us done that before? Don't be shy now. You can't tell me I'm the only person who has done that before. Nobody. It's a lie. I don't believe any of you. Well, it happens. CI/CD would help you prevent situations like that. So in order to automate, the key thing to figure out is feedback. The sooner you get feedback, the quicker you can take action and resolve problems. Feedback is the most critical thing that you should think about when you're automating things. Feedback is the reason why you automate. If you have production code going to server, if it breaks and it doesn't get to the server, you want to know, right? Because when you're doing it manually, you will know immediately. Is that not the truth? But immediately you give it to a machine or Circle CI or Jenkins X or Travis or one of the Azure products to do on your behalf. You need feedback. You need to know when something fails. That is the whole point of automation. Knowing when something fails. If it fails, the sooner you have information, the quicker you can react. There's also something that I learned in production. Because developers always want to push their code to the development environment immediately, there's never really have a time to test it themselves before it gets to the development server, right? So they usually just test locally. I coined something called PR environments. PR environments are like throwaway environments that you can use temporarily. So you can use CI/CD to set it up, and then once the PR has been merged, you can take down that throwaway environment. But that throwaway environment will only be used by the developer in question. Then the development server will be used by everybody else. Now, there was a time the QA engineers in one of my team reached out to me and said, hey, Chuka, we're trying to test this new feature and so on and so forth. And I was like, it has been deployed now. He now said, but I'm looking on the server, and the feature you talked about is not there. And I was arguing with him for close to 30 minutes. So it turns out that the deployment happened, but it failed. It didn't get to the server, right? But anytime I go and check the server, because I was using Kubernetes, it works so well that it will just keep working, right? The old one will not replace the new one, or the new one will replace the old one unless everything works, checks out fine. So when I go to the server, I look and I say, it's up. There's nothing wrong. The QA engineer says, the feature I want to test is not there. And that caused a whole rattle. So how we solved that? It's simple. We started version tagging. So every time we want to do a deployment, we will add a version number. Now, you can use semantic versioning. You can read up on it. It's quite simple. The first number indicates the major. The middle number indicates the minor. And the last number indicates a patch. So if you're patching, which is you're creating a fix, then that means you change the last number. If you're creating a new feature that is backward compatible, that's when you use the middle number. Or if you're creating a new feature totally that is not backward compatible, and when I say backward compatible, let's say it's your API service, and the front ends will break, right? That's when you change the first number. Now, this tip helped me in so many ways. The first way is, anytime I now did a deployment, I would always go and check the version number. And I had this thing where I would always create an endpoint, and all that endpoint did for me was return the version that the thing is running. That's all the endpoints did. So before I deploy, I'll change the version number, then do a deployment. When I go to the server, after deployment is done, to confirm that it has actually succeeded, I check the version number. And once the version number has changed, then I'm sure that it has actually fully deployed. But I also use those version number with Git tags to keep state of the application. So secrets, configuration, environment variables, everything is locked in, and I use Docker and build it. And when I'm building it, the same version number that I give the application is the same version number I give the Docker image. And that's how I keep track. So that tomorrow, if I want to deploy a previous Docker image, all I have to do is deploy the previous version number that I know that was working. And that's how version numbers can help you. It saved my life many times. Automated tests. Well, I have a story that helps here, but that I think I was traumatized by. Somebody did something new, broke 3 other things that I had done, and then it got deployed. So his own feature was working, and then my own stopped working.
And that is probably one of the most painful things that can happen to you. Because guess what? Your QA engineer or whoever is product person or whoever tested it today, hey, it's working. Then tomorrow afternoon, after changes have been made, sad face, it's not working. And then you'll be arguing with him. You tested it. We both tested it. It's working. Has this happened to anybody? Yeah? This is how you can solve for that problem. So I've had this conversation with many people many times. Oh, we don't need automated tests. It's time consuming. It's time is wasting. It's blah, blah, blah. It's blah, blah, blah. It can save lives. I'm telling you. You would have no joy if you cannot figure out that somebody else's code broke your own code. I am telling you, this saves lives. Version control. Do I need to talk about this? Who doesn't know what version control is? You don't? So version control is essentially a tool that makes it easy for one or more people to collaborate on a project. That is all that it is. But even if you're going to use version control, I would suggest that you use Git Flow. Git Flow workflow is a type of version control, and it works well with a proper CI/CD stroke release management system. This is something that has saved me countless numbers of times. Here's what I mean. So remember what I was talking about where, developers would work on something new when it gets merged? Half the time, when they are working, they tend to work on the same development branch that will get deployed to the development server. But with Git Flow suggests that you should use different branches for each new feature. So if you want to do feature ABC, use a branch named ABC. When it's ready, merge it into dev. And that's where PR systems come into place. If not, if everybody's working on the development branch at the same time, without using some sort of workflow, whether it's feature-based or so on and so forth, there's going to be chaos. Because people's work will keep overwriting other people's work. Right? Read up on it. Access control. The situation where somebody merges in, you can prevent and protect your branches. GitHub has it, Bitbucket has it. You can actually go there and specify, please, all developers cannot write to dev branch. All developers cannot write to master branch. They can only merge from a feature branch, and it's only someone like this that can merge it. That's what access control will help you with. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is how I feel. Yeah. How many of us can relate? Eh? How many of us can relate? Exactly. I don't want to see you walking on the master branch. The master branch is sacred. It's like the Holy Grail. Nobody should touch it. You should have your own developed branch, which should be working off of a feature branch that we get eventually. In fact, nobody merges to master. Well, that's when you're using Git workflow. This applies. Rollbacks. This is probably one of the most painful situations to be in. One of those scenarios where bad code gets into production, right? Somebody overwrote your work or bugs have. What usually always happens at that point is, please get my application back to a working state. There are two ways to do it. Either try to fix the problem right there and then, or deploy the last working version, right? But more often than not, I find out that people usually just try to solve the problem immediately so that they can move forward. A good way to keep your sanity, as I have done many times, is to roll back to a previous working version. If you roll back to a previous working version, you would have breathing room to figure out why the new version is not working. Rollbacks is not really a culture I've seen locally, although traveled, worked, of course, Gigster office, even at Google, right? They use rollbacks. It helps them keep their sanity while they're trying to fix a problem. There was a time when we also had a delta in production deployment. While we were saving our database, right? While we were saving our database, requests were coming in. And the snapshot of the database that we had was not up to date with the live data. So what I did was I came up with a plan to try and solve for that problem, because that problem can be quite frustrating. First is, put your app in maintenance mode. How many of us, when we're doing updates, put our app in maintenance mode? Anybody?
So we're all in the same category. Eh? None? Nobody? Well, put your app in maintenance mode. Maintenance mode is essentially, you know those messages that say, hey, we're temporarily out of service, we'll come back in like 20 hours or blah, blah, blah. And then nothing can happen, right? That is what maintenance mode is. It's nothing fancy. It's just telling the users that, okay, wait, I'm going to try and solve this problem, or I'm trying to do an upgrade, and so on and so forth. When you finish, I mean, for those of us that use banking apps like GT Bank, First Bank, we've all seen this information. You're trying to log in, and it tell you the app is not available right now, right? They're in maintenance mode. When you put it in maintenance mode, you back up your DB, and then you can deploy the new versions. Always keep track of the current deployed version, then deploy the new one. Then when you're done, you can then remove the maintenance mode. But when you now want to roll back, which is the important thing, you put the app in maintenance mode again. Remember, you backed up your DB, so you can restore the DB back to the same state. Now, when it's maintenance mode, should be no transactions came in. So at least the DB state should be the same. Good. Now, this is the part that is important. Point 3. You can either deploy a version number that you kept track of back into the server, or if you are using Kubernetes, you can then do something called a rollout undo. So a rollout undo would reverse the last action of deployment states that happen to your cluster. And I found it very useful. If it's something that was kept track of, immediately you can deploy to the last 2 or 3 versions. But if the last 2 or 3 versions are also faulty, then you can pick a specific version number with the corresponding database and then back it up. So during deployment, you don't have to do it for small fixes, but for major improvements, major feature additions, I think you should do that. Monitoring and alerting. I think this is probably one of the most difficult things to do. In production, keeping track of what is happening in your ecosystem. You know, are services failing? Are my servers up? Is the computer processing time, okay? There was a time when I had a current working application, and that application was chewing up 300% of the memory. 300% of the CPU power. You know when your CPU goes from 1 to 100 to 300? I think it happens on our laptops, Abby. That means plus the extra CPU plus everything is hogging everything. If you don't have monitoring and alerting set up when you move to containers, it can be difficult for you to track. Let me tell you why. Kubernetes does an excellent job of tracking down containers that use up resources when you configure it properly. So immediately it starts to use resources. What will it do? It will kill it and restart it. And then when it restarts it, the users will not even know that there was a problem. So the only way you can figure out if those kind of issues exist is when you install things that help you to check for problems like that routinely. And that's when you enter Stackdriver. I know many of us have heard of it. If you've not heard of it, Google it. It's one of Google's flagship products. Do you know the reason why I love it? Everything is there. Error reporting, log tracking, trace, debugger, profiler, all these tools that you would have gone to New Relic or gone to, please, can somebody throw those names out to me? Sentry, or gone to, who can help me here? Eh? What? Logstash, yes, or Logstack. Is it Logstack or Log? I know Logstash, I don't know Logstack. But I mean, these tools, you know, you'd have to go to 3 different or 4 different vendors to provide. I use Stackdriver, and I use it extensively well in production. It has saved my butt a couple of times. In fact, I recently had a problem like 2 days ago, and I used Stackdriver to help me solve the problem. Having bugs is a regular thing. I don't know if there's any human being that exists in this room that has built bug-free software. If you built bug-free software, if you're in this room, I'll give you 1 million naira now. Promise you. Nobody wants to claim it. You need to show me proof. Can you show proof? If you can show proof, come and meet me after. I'll give you 1 million naira. If you've built bug-free software before, that other people are using. No, who is the person? The key thing is other people are using. If other people are using it, no problem. You come and get 1 million naira from me. Live debugging. This is probably one of the other fancier tools I've used. Like I was talking about, I'm trying, as you notice, I'm trying to get through the presentation, so I'm not talking about a lot of the stories, but I've had situations many times. Currently, how do we debug? The way we debug is this. Someone tells you, oh, there's a problem with our application. You go to the repository. You download it to your system, right? You check it out. Then you go and run it. Then you try and simulate or reproduce the bug on your computer. Is that not what we all do? Is there anybody that does something else? Maybe you're a genius. You just use your mind Jedi tricks. Is there anybody? I figured there's nobody. I think we all do the same thing. I'm not an exceptional genius. And the funny thing about it is, when you are in production and you are integrated to some third-party system that you cannot test on your system, how do you debug that kind of situation? You have to log into your production server to check it out, right? And check the logs there, or try and figure out if you can reproduce it. Well, enter Live Debugger. Live Debugger is a part of the Stackdriver toolkit. I kid you not. If I had time for demo, I would have showed it. You can literally you know how you console log variables? Like if it's Python, PHP, or JavaScript, you console log your variables. Maybe like you have a method that accepts post variables, and then you console log it, or in Python you print it, or in PHP you echo it to see the contents of those variables, right? That is what debugger can help you do while your application is running in production. You don't have to redeploy it. You don't have to do anything else. Just add a log point and tell it, I want to see this data that is coming in, and you will see it live. The thing is like voodoo. I'm serious. It's like voodoo. And every time I've done a presentation on it, people have always told me it's a lie, it's not possible, until I actually do a live demo. And I know you people will not believe me, but we don't have time. So let's move on. But check it out. Please check it out. Thank you. No clap for me. So, do we have any questions? I'm going to check if anybody posted any question. So it seems like we're all geniuses. I don't see any question here. Is there any question from the crowd? No questions. We're all hot, Abby. We're all very hot. Okay, so I'm going to ask. I want to farms. Who knows what farmsing is? So I need proof to tell my wife at home that I actually gave a talk to close to 1,000 people. Can you guys help me? You can help me. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a video. And while I'm recording the video, I am going to put myself in the shot. And while I'm putting myself in the shot, I just want you people to scream, "Dev First Lagos." Can we do it? Can we all do it? All right, one. Oh, hold on. I need to be in the shot. What? How much? I can't hear you. I'm sorry, the line is breaking up. I can't hear you. All right, guys. So we're here at GDG Lagos, and here are the wonderful people. Okay, so that's enough proof, right? Thank you all for attending.